Hello. Last week, I started collecting together everything we've been discussing in the last few months on this series about Donald Trump. The aim of the last episode was to determine what Trump's grand strategy approach has been in his first few months back in office. Stephen Moran's paper, called A User's Guide to Restructuring the Global Trading System, and Zoltan Pozar's pitch for a cheaper dollar and a Mar-a-Lago Accord are two of the biggest influences for Trump's long-term pursuits. But when we collect these pursuits together, we can narrow them down even more. It all boils down to Trump's pursuit of America first. A large tool in this pursuit for Trump has, of course, been his tariff policy. When we explore Trump and his policy on this grand scale, it can be easy to get bogged down in the noise, of which there is quite a lot. However, the most important question that we can ask is this strategy working? With Trump's pursuits redrawing global trade and global finance, we can also assess the impacts on financial markets of such changes. This is what we'll dive into today. So to begin, let's assess if this strategy is working. First of all, let's add up the amount of investment that Trump received from his recent trip to the Middle East. Trump claims to have received over $2 trillion from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE collectively. There are some issues to bring up here, though. Firstly, some of the Saudi investment projects were announced back in January, so many will be counting them this time as fresh investment when they've actually already been announced. Secondly, Qatar has heavily bailed out Boeing by undertaking the biggest order of Boeing planes that's ever been seen. But with Boeing stagnating, this deal will give the company a lifeline, but it doesn't guarantee the future success of Qatar's investment. Trump has also made deals involving sending NVIDIA chips to countries in the Middle East. The biggest issue is, could this technology end up in the hands of adversaries of the United States? This was a large part of why Biden imposed controls on the sale of most US chips, because he didn't want the technological theft that the United States has reported has been occurring, especially in China over the last few decades. This is an issue that will be seen with time, of course, but the potential is there. To sum up Trump's Middle East trip, one of his biggest talking points was that the times of nation-building projects and telling people how to live were over. This translates to no more exporting democracy to nations that don't want it, and this will be positively received by leaders around the world of a more authoritarian nature. But Trump's more distant approach to international relations does open up risks. So Trump's Middle East trip made it clear that he is trying to attract investment into physical assets. The blog post over on Substack, linked to this episode, includes a full list of the investments that Trump has attracted thus far in his second term. I'll link that below. If we focus on this individually, this would evidence that Trump's tariffs, being used as a negotiating tool, are actually working based on the sheer number of deals that have been negotiated. But there are also other effects that we've seen occur as a result of Trump's tariff policy. His big aim here is to use the tariffs to restore US manufacturing. But this is where the adverse effects of the tariffs are being seen, or the adverse effects that we will see further down the line. Firstly, services now make up 70% of the global economy, and manufacturing is 30%. But if anything, with consumerism fueling many global economies around the world, we're actually making more than ever. Surely with us manufacturing more things than ever, this would mean there's potential for a manufacturing boom in the United States. Unfortunately, that's not quite the case because people no longer work on manufacturing lines. Machines do. We've existed through periods before where such dramatic shifts have occurred in trade, finance, and manufacturing, namely in the 1930s and the 1970s. As a result of these changes, we also saw geopolitical tensions rise. But eventually, with global reform and innovation, these periods of tensions eventually faded. Of course, these recoveries weren't without pain, but they eventually did come. However, if Trump wishes to restore US manufacturing, his pursuits via tariffs strike me as one that will lengthen these recoveries, and the period of geopolitical tension will last for longer. This, in my opinion, is why I believe Trump is heavily pursuing peace in conflicts around the world. He recognises that geopolitical tensions are elevated, and if he doesn't do something to reduce these tensions, his domestic policy could falter, and tensions that we're seeing around the world could continue to escalate. Trump's current strategy is to pivot to a level of self-sufficiency in necessities and a boost to manufacturing. If Trump does focus on the industries of tomorrow and the key materials required to grow these industries in his approach, then this strategy could turn out to be more net positive than negative. But with such a change comes unexpected consequences. Trump's tariff policy has brought inflation back to the table. And as a result of this, we need to assess what the potential financial and economic implications could be. Now, Trump wants investment in the United States to rotate into harder assets, as we've discussed, such as military deals, infrastructure investment, and manufacturing. Naturally, with the American stock market being such an attractor of global capital, if investment is to pivot into these harder assets, the stock market would suffer as a result. The always rising nature of the US stock market certainly makes it an easy place to park capital and expect a positive return, but Trump no longer wants this to be the case. He doesn't want a complete market collapse, but investment in physical assets will heavily benefit Trump's America First pivot. I question whether Trump can have it both ways. Can he have investment into harder assets without the stock market falling? We saw heavy stock market losses following the Liberation Day tariffs, but these were completely reversed in the following weeks and months, and Trump then called for investors to buy stocks. However, if he is truly pursuing an America First policy, it's natural that investment in the stock market or treasuries will be where capital would shift from. If we couple this with the fact that we've had falling treasury demand for many years, Trump ultimately can't have it all. And so, in my opinion, further negative impacts in the stock market should be expected. This also brings the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, to the table. Trump wants rates cut to attempt to incite economic growth, but Powell is worried about the effect that tariffs might have on rising inflationary pressures. Powell is in the role of Fed Chairman for the next year, and Trump ultimately can't do anything about that. The Federal Reserve seemingly wants to remain politically independent, and so regardless of how much Trump shouts for reduced rates, Powell is likely going to keep them where they are, or potentially even raise them if we see inflation return in the data in the May reading. Now, I've touched here on issues and potential points where Trump's plan could fail, but it wouldn't be fair to ignore areas where his plan has actually worked. Trump has hoped for a cheaper dollar in an attempt to incite exports, and he certainly made the dollar cheaper. It's questionable if this is from reduced demand for the dollar or a potential effect of any secret currency deals, but a cheaper dollar has occurred nevertheless. Any potential boosts to exports as a result of the cheaper dollar would unfold over years and would largely be affected by changes to manufacturing that Trump is in pursuit of. Also, the numerous investment deals that Trump has created are promising if they do lead to greater self-sufficiency of key supply chains for the United States. This pursuit to self-sufficiency is also supported by cheaper energy prices that we're currently seeing. From this, Trump can ensure the future of US energy security by refilling the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is exactly what he is doing. This will also make gasoline prices cheaper for consumers, but as I've alluded to many times, the tariffs and their eventual effects, especially the incredibly high tariffs that we saw on China, have seen inflationary pressures return. And I've not even started to discuss the biggest elephant in the room, which is rising US debt. In this past week, we've seen developing stories on the subject, as we've seen Trump's spending bill and a stablecoin bill pass through the US political system. We also saw Moody's downgrade US debt, being the last of the big three ratings companies to downgrade US debt. But this has seen adverse effects in the bond market, as we've seen long-term yields rise sharply. Next time, I'll explore why this is happening and what could be the potential effects of such moves. I question whether this could be the biggest issue that will potentially upend Trump's grand strategy pursuits. This is what we'll dive into next time. Until then, I've been Dylan. I'll talk to you next time.